Hi folks, in this video I'm going to be taking a look at building a Enzo Trapper knife. So the Enzo Trapper knives are pretty well known. There's many examples on YouTube, people using them, people reviewing them. Now from what I understand, they have been bought out by Brisa. You can see on the blade it's now called Brisa, so it is essentially the same knife. Now they do sell finished versions of their knives where it's fully finished with its sheath, but they also, for the aspirant knife maker, they sell kits, and in this case just the blade. Now the advantage of buying just the blade is obviously you can choose the steel you want and customize the handle and sheath to your preference. So this is the Scandi version and this is the Elmax steel. So it's another good reason for buying a kit version. You can buy a more expensive steel and then build up a knife at a lower cost than if you bought it outright. Now they do also sell, I think, 01 versions and possibly other stainless versions. So my starting point, obviously the blade blank. I'm going to be using this red hessian micarta, red and black, for the handle scales, and I've decided to go with some silver or stainless Corby bolts for the attachment of the scales. And I'm also going to be adding this vulcanized fiber liner to the micarta scales. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure these scales are as flat as possible before I glue on the fiber lining. Unfortunately there was quite a bow in these micarta scales. I'm not sure where I got them from, but I had to take them over to the belt sander and put them on the platen to get them flat enough. I want to try and make sure they're as flat as possible so that there's a secure bond on the knife handle. So now I'm just going to trace out the sizes of the liner material that I want to attach. I'll just cut that out with some scissors and then I'll be good to epoxy it onto the micarta. So now I'm just going to use some acetone to clean up the surfaces just to make sure there's no residue on them. Okay, now with the liners glued on, I need to start thinking about drilling the holes for the attachments. Now I'm going to use these Corby bolts, which are a mechanical fix. So you have the mechanical because they screw together, as well as the chemical bond from the epoxy. The only thing I need to be aware of with these Corbys is that they can bottom out because they have an internal thread. If you make the recess too small, they will lose their mechanical advantage. So I need to take into account the thickness of the scales, the blade, stock, and then I need to drill 2 holes in there to accept the Corby bolts. I got this quite a useful little set online. So this drill diameter is the same as the internal core of the Corby, and then there's got this milling extension which will allow me to mill out the broader outer part of the Corby. So that's the bit that I need to step down so that I still need enough internal dimensions. Just need to measure that one, make sure that it's not bottomed out, and leave that amount in the handle scales. Alrighty, so what I've done so far is I just roughed out the shape of the handle on the bandsaw. We just made it a bit easier to measure up how much of the gap I wanted for the Corbys, and now I've done a dry fit. I just wanted to make sure that it's all as I expect. The step is giving me enough clearance before I try and go for the glue up stage. That's always a bit frenetic, so this is just a quick dry fit to make sure it's all as I expect, and so far things looking okay. So the next thing I want to do is just shape the front end, because once that is all glued on, you can't access that front end. So just marked out where I think it's going to run, put a curve on, so I'll cut that curve out and then I'm going to just put a little bit of a chamfer, and if I keep them together I can chamfer both sides equally. So my next stage now is to clean up these inside of the scales with some acetone, just remove any grease, and then I'm going to glue them up. I want to try and get to the glue up today so I can work on it over the weekend. The general consensus is you don't want to over tighten the Corby bolts because you could just strip them. So they're pulled in fairly tightly now. It's going to add some clamps for, you know, just for additional security, and then that's it. We'll leave it and see what happens. Okay, so my next step, I think what I'm going to do now is just take the micarta down to the blade stock. I'm going to keep everything flat so I can mark out the shape that I want finally. So I'm going to reduce this down to the actual metal line and flatten off these Corby bolts, and then I'll mark out the shape of the handle that I want. Okay, so I've been through quite a few grits of sandpaper, and I'm fairly happy with the finished article. I mean, it's going to be a knife I'm going to use out in the field, so, and I don't have a buffing machine, so it's not going to be up to the highest level of sheen, but so far pretty good. So I'm going to put some linseed oil on now, I think, just to see what it looks like. Hessian micarta, just there's such a nice pattern in it. It's come up really well. So pretty happy with that. I'll clean up the blade now and show you what the finished article looks like. Alrighty folks, there's how it looks in its finished state. I'm pretty happy with it, how it turned out. A couple of things I maybe would have done differently. At the time I wasn't aware of how much black was in this micarta, so I used black liners, and really you can't actually see them. I probably maybe would have used red liners, but you know, it's difficult to know until you shape it to see how it's going to turn out. But it's quite a nice color though, the canvas micarta. I think I would probably use Loveless bolts rather than the Corby's next time. They're less finicky to set up and use, and you still get the mechanical fix as well. So probably would use them next time. Also, I probably would remove more of the scale material closer to the metal before I start shaping on the belt grinder. You know, it was clogging it up quite quickly. So I reverted to using a hand file to reduce it down. So that's probably something else I'd do differently. Went for the Coke bottle sort of profile on the handle. Quite like that. I wasn't sure how it would pan out with this particular shape on the back. I think most of these don't have a Coke bottle shape usually. So it was nice to see that that worked out. I also left out the lanyard hole. On this one, they're really close to the end. And you know, I don't tend to use lanyards much on these knives, so it's fine for me to leave it out. So a couple of things probably worth noting. You know, it's Elmax steel, which is a so-called super steel, so it is more expensive than the 01. But if you have to buy one of these knives, you know, fully finished, they are quite expensive. So this is a good way, I think, of getting a fairly high quality knife if you're prepared to put in some work, making the handle, making the sheath yourself. So definitely, I think, worth doing. And you can get, you know, the price of high-end or even just general custom bushcraft knives. It's just eye-watering these days. So you know, if you can do it yourself and get a fairly decent product for a lot less, then it's definitely worth looking into. And, you know, it's not that difficult. I mean, if I can do it, I think anyone can. You know, you don't have to have a belt grinder. It'd be a bit more difficult, but, you know, you could do it with files and sandpaper, etc. So definitely doable. But, you know, you can turn out quite a nice product in the end. These Micarta scales are fairly easily available on Etsy for, I think it was £8 for a set. You know, the Corbys are a couple of pounds. So you really just have to spend some money on the blade, and then you can make quite a nice knife. So anyway, part 2, I'll be making a sheath for this knife. So if you're interested, you need to click along and watch that one. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.